Ukraine seems to be getting the Tomahawk missile, and that's more or less confirmed by none other than Donald Trump himself. We'll talk about what this is going to mean for Ukraine, what the system is actually capable of, and what the current state of affair is. All of this here in this video, and we'll obviously also answer the question whether this is going to win the war for Ukraine. Axios has confirmed that Zelensky actually asked Trump for the Tomahawk cruise missile when the two of them met in New York. At that time, it was speculation that we are talking about the Tomahawk because nothing else would have had the same effect. And Zelensky said that he asked Donald Trump for a weapon system that would change the overall war and that would basically turn the tide. He said that Donald Trump is considering it. We're going to talk later why this might change the tide of the war, but we'll start off here with this part where Donald Trump is actually answering the question about the cruise missile.
Steve? You made a decision on whether to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or sell them to NATO and let them sell them to Ukraine.
Yeah, I sort of made a decision, pretty much. If you consider, I think I want to find out what they're doing with them.
Yes.
You know, where are they sending them? I guess I'd have to ask that question.
So Donald Trump more or less confirmed this is generally being seen that he made the decision, as he said himself. He made the decision, but he will want to know exactly what will happen with it. At the same time, he is saying that Ukraine won't be able to use the cruise missile as it wants, as it pleases, but that he wants to have a say in the circumstances of the usage of the Tomahawk. So let's talk about the system first. What is the Tomahawk cruise missile? We have it here. The BGM-109 Tomahawk is a cruise missile which is in usage by the United States since the 1980s. The current users are the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. In the future, the Australians and the Japanese armed forces will also receive the cruise missile, and now likely Ukraine. It is roughly weighing 1.5 tons, and its warhead has 1,000 pounds or 454 kilograms. The warhead, apart from nuclear weapons which are not used, and obviously Ukraine is not going to receive, the warhead will either have high explosive or cluster munition. In total, the system has a range of roughly 1,300 to 2,500 kilometers, depending on the version. More modern versions have probably a significantly longer range, but Ukraine is unlikely to receive them. The speed of the cruise missile is 920 kilometers an hour, so still subsonic, even though high subsonic. And during that flight, it flies at just 30 to 50 meters in altitude. This means that a lot of the time it's actually flying under the radar, especially as it is navigating to exploit radar shadows to prevent detection. Its navigation is done over GPS, obviously, but also over INS, so internal navigation, meaning that internally it calculates the time it has flown, the direction it has flown, to keep an understanding where it currently is. At the same time, it also has TERCOM, so terrain contour matching, meaning it is adjusting what it can see with its sensors with the internal data. So any river, a hill, a valley, all of this will be adjusted to its internal database, which allows it to identify where it actually is, even if the internal navigation system, the passive measuring of speed, etc., has gone astray. Even if GPS is jammed or even spoofed, this allows the missile to still know where it is and thus have a high chance of actually finding its target. The low altitude of flying makes it difficult to intercept, as ground-based air defense systems either have it under the radar horizon or just a small window of engaging. As you can imagine, for instance, a soldier with a manpad only has a few seconds during which the missile pops up in his shooting range, and then it's already behind the next trees, behind the next buildings, etc. As it's flying so low, the angle simply doesn't allow for a long time of engagement. This allows a high survivability despite its age, and the navigation allows for a high security, high hit likelihood, as the jamming of individual parts of it is more or less pointless due to the combination of different ways to identify where it's currently flying and where to it's meant to be. This allows it to hit hard, really hard, with fairly big warheads at a long distance, and that all of that reliable. So what can the system do for Ukraine? Depending on the version, the number that is going to be sent will obviously also be a big question, and the targets that are in range, all of this will play a role how it will shape the war for Ukraine. As the missiles have a high rate of survivability, if enough of them are being delivered by the United States, hits can almost be guaranteed due to oversaturation if, as said, the Ukrainians receive enough missiles for each of the targets they intend to engage. But what could Ukraine engage? That's obviously the big question, and what difference could it make? Now, Russia has a maximum refinery capacity of 6.5 million barrels a day. This is here. The 1,600 kilometer range has the version. If Ukraine receives the 1,600 kilometer version, 79.7% of all of Russia's refinery capacity are in the range of this cruise missile. So basically 4 out of 5 refinery capacities. The 2,500 kilometer range variant doesn't change that much anymore. Now we are talking about 84.7% of the capacity. So almost 85% of Russia's oil refining capacity would lie in range if Ukraine receives that. The results of Ukraine striking the refineries would be nothing short of devastating. That cannot be exaggerated. The public would basically have wouldn't have fuel anymore. The economy would collapse as trucks wouldn't drive anymore and people would get trouble to even get to work. And even a shortage in fuel for the military itself would be thinkable under these circumstances. Now, obviously, Russia can import fuel, but to cover its full demand is fairly difficult and fairly unlikely. First of all, it's going to cost a fortune, and Russia is increasingly under strain financially. And the next question would be, who is going to deliver these amounts of fuel that Russia might need in these circumstances? Europe is not going to help Russia with this. Other nations would see their domestic prices explode if they start exporting in serious amounts, as obviously this would reduce the amount of fuel available for the domestic market, and this would then create an inflation with all the known results for their local economy. So for other nations, handing over a few percentage of their production, selling that to Russia makes sense, but anything more than this will create domestic problems and thus is unattractive. So Russia will have trouble actually to fill its demand. But that's not all. Obviously, the defense industry is also a possibility. There's a huge number of high value targets in range of the cruise missiles. One of the important ones would be the Shahid factory in Yelabuga in Tatarstan. This is where the Russians build almost 3,000 Shahid each month, which are then being launched at Ukraine. Basically nothing, but that's not all. Basically nothing in Russia is produced for the military that is not in range of the 2,500 kilometer version, or at the very least parts that are being used. For instance, the Sukhoi fighter planes are produced in the Far East and cannot be reached by even the 2,500 kilometer range, but its engines are being produced in range. So without engines, those planes will not be able to be produced. Basically, with enough Tomahawk and the permission to use them, Ukraine can collapse Russia's defense industry more or less completely. Now, that's not talking about all the potential other targets, be it airports. We have mentioned here the Engels 2 Air Force Base, where the Russian strategic bombers are stationed, that could be destroyed on the tarmac, especially as the Tomahawk has cluster munition as well, that can thus be spread over a huge area. We are not talking about headquarters, barracks, ammunition depots. We're also not talking about important bridges or any other potential logistic target that could be struck. Or in other words, Ukraine can, if they receive enough of them and if they get permission, force Russia to peace and get Russia on their knees. With enough of them and with permission, and this is unfortunately the big difficulty here in this question. Yehor Cherniev, he's the head of the Ukrainian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and the deputy head of the Parliamentary National Security Committee in Ukraine. He's saying the delivery will happen in stages. That's what he's expecting. The main goal is to force Russia into negotiations. Only after that would be the strengthening of Ukraine a target. So this is, we basically can expect a gradual escalation by the Ukrainians, by the Americans in regards to the delivery. So first of all, at first we'll be given only a few missiles, a few dozens. That's his quote, maybe. But we won't be allowed to fire them right away. They'll watch how the Kremlin reacts. If there's no reaction, we'll be able to strike several targets near the Russian border. If Putin still refuses to negotiate, the strike radius and the number of deliveries will gradually increase as the war escalates. Eventually, all restrictions will be lifted, except perhaps airstrikes on the Kremlin itself or directly on Putin. This is more or less confirming what I said in past videos here on this channel again and again. Trump will use the Tomahawk to force Russia into negotiations. This is the best ways he has. I said it in the past that Trump has the means to force Russia into negotiations. He just wasn't willing to use them. So it's not, his goal is not primarily to help Ukraine, especially not to help Ukraine win the war, but his goal is to end the war in Ukraine. He has huge ability to escalate though, and in the past I said that this is his way to peace. This is the way he can use to achieve peace. A increasing escalation, for instance, every week stronger hits against Russia would continue until the Russians are willing to negotiate in earnest, until they are willing to give up their maximalist war goals. The delivery itself is already a sign towards the Kremlin, but if the first usages are, for instance, inside of Crimea or against the Kerch Bridge, that would be the next step, the next message towards the Kremlin. It would still be inside of Ukraine, the strikes inside of Ukraine, but they would be a message that not only has Ukraine received the Tomahawks, but now they are willing and capable of using them. And this way, escalation can follow on escalations, targets can be extended, strike packages can be increased until the point that the Russians are forced to give in. The destruction of Yelabuga, for instance, of the factory in Yelabuga, would already help Ukraine a ton, as the strikes with Shahid would almost completely stop, or at least would be diminished massively, and thus the strikes against the civilians would decrease significantly. But at the same time, it would be a threat against the Russians that everything else that would be possible to be struck could also be struck without moving the balance to a degree that Russia would have to overreact. Basically, the US would send that message by using Ukraine towards the Russians. If we want, we can destroy everything that is dear to you, so you better negotiate now. We've just demonstrated that we are capable of. Next time, the target might hurt you a lot more. So if we come to a conclusion, the delivery of the cruise missile is now extremely likely. The delivery is not going to be sent, though, to allow Ukraine to win the war. At least that's the current state of affairs. The Tomahawk itself would possibly be able to achieve the win for Ukraine. I already stated what a destruction of the Russian refineries would mean, and that does not include all the other potential targets. But right now, there's simply no expectation that this is a likely outcome of the current deliveries that are to be expected. It's much more expected that this is meant to force Russia to the negotiating table without maximalist demands, basically to increase the pain towards Russia, so Russia is forced to give up some positions while they might believe that they could continue fighting. Simply the scale that the costs of war would be so high that Russia rather makes peace. This will work well with the Tomahawk if enough of them are delivered. That I do not see why that should not work. The only question will be the will to deliver them and the will to give the permission to usage to the Ukrainians. Once that is demonstrated, the Russians should soon have not much of a choice but to start moving, at least if the permission to strike is given against targets that matter. In total, the usage of the cruise missiles doesn't even have to be too big. It just has to be sent in a way, a message has to be sent to the Kremlin that the Kremlin takes seriously, and this might happen fairly soon. In total, so while we don't have anything definitive yet, the end of the war is probably coming closer with this quite significantly, and that should generally be a good thing. That was it for today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.